For as long as I can remember, I've always struggled with finishing projects. Like, I'd enthusiastically start working on a new idea, and within months, it's gathering dust in a random folder. So to remedy this, I started working on my indie game Tenkin Sands. The plan was to just get something out. Just finish it. And so the idea was quite simple. A dinosaur in tank. Yeah. Like oxygen not included, but on wheels, you know?
In this video, I want to...
And guess what? I recently finished it. And in this video, I'm gonna talk about what I learned and what you can get out of it. Lesson number 1. Don't take too many breaks. Especially towards the middle of this 2-year journey, my productivity was so inconsistent. Like, I'd have times when I'd work on it for a week or two, and then somewhere I don't even touch it for almost a month. Personally, I think this is my biggest mistake so far. Why? Number 1, reduced motivation. That's the most obvious. Yes, motivation is something that naturally fluctuates, but of course it'll go down if you stop feeding the inspiration, motivation, action cycle. If you stop working on it, you'll get less results, less feedback, and less motivation. In my case, I thought I'd almost abandoned the whole project a couple times because of this lack of motivation. Number 2, inconsistent codebase. The thing with working on a project for so long is that you gradually improve your skills as you go. When you grow as a programmer, so does your code. Now, what if you stopped to work to some other game idea for a while? Well, you would continue to grow, but your original project wouldn't. So, by the time you've come back to it, you've grown a lot. And what you're met with is an outdated mess of a codebase. And that can really mess with the long-term health of your project. It's almost like if you tasked yourself with finishing a random drawing you made as a kid. It kind of doesn't really make sense, right? For me, there's just been so many times where I came back after break and I was forced to deal or conform with shitty implementations and structuring it from when I was less experienced. Personally, I found that so frustrating. The problem's not that I was inexperienced before, but that there's this gap again. For example, I once had this series of bugs that were haunting me for a good chunk of the project. Minions would sporadically forget tasks they were supposed to do. Tasks in the global pool would just linger around without getting removed, which clogged it. And dinos would randomly freeze into place in the middle of doing work. And for the life of me, I could not figure out why. Well, as it turns out, that was caused by inconsistencies in how I was handling incomplete tasks. At the start, I had an idea on how tasks would get dispatched, but one break later, I had a different one. So when those two clashed, it became a tangled mess. Fixing this required a major rewrite of like a third of the whole game at the time. It was such a pain. So please, please save yourself from this. So, for solutions, now you might think, okay then, so what? Just don't take breaks? That's unrealistic. Yeah, that's unrealistic and unreasonable for most of us. Life would get in the way, motivation will dip, and so many things could go wrong. And there's just no way around that. Instead, it would help you massively if you just make sure your code is well documented, or self-documenting, that's the best. Like, make a crude design document if you haven't already. Even when you can't work on your project, try to at least think about it, right? Check back on your code to see how you implemented things. It's still better than radio silence for a whole month or so. Just don't let yourself forget. Lesson number 2. Cut the scope. Time is ticking. I feel like this is the one everyone's talking about the most, and that's for a reason. Scope creep, or feature creep, is probably the worst thing that could happen to you during development. It's basically where you try to add more features than you can handle. You set the bar so high that you just get overwhelmed, right? It's like climbing a mountain that keeps growing every step you take, but you're growing it yourself, if that makes any sense. If taking too many breaks was my biggest mistake, then feature creep was definitely my second biggest. For example, as soon as I started work on Tank and Sands, I started getting these big ideas. And I'm sure you can relate to this. Complex crafting recipes and economy, elaborate encounters, customization options, all of them, instruments you could play in game to build a community or something. I had way too high expectations for it, even though it was only my first full game. Thankfully though, I realized, wait a minute, I actually don't have that much time. And that's when I knew I had to cut the scope a bunch. And I ended up with what you see here. It's not much, but it's honest work. So here are the things that helped me the most to just let go, right? I already said it, and I'll say it again. Clarifying the game's identity through a design document. It doesn't really have to be elaborate. It could totally just be organized scribbles on a random piece of paper. For me, this allowed me to scrutinize every little idea I got and throw away unnecessary ones before they took over my mind. And as a side effect, this removed distractions. It gave me a clear roadmap ahead. Besides, if I have a good idea, but it doesn't quite fit the game, then I'll just reserve it for a future opportunity. Next, noticing that most of them are unrealistic, that I most likely wouldn't be able to implement all of these features in a reasonable time frame. I know there's better ways to spend my time rather than trying to shove an incompatible idea into an already complex game. Like doing marketing. Which brings me to lesson number 3. Not doing enough marketing. I mean, when you think about it, how else would you get recognition, right? If you're gonna do marketing, in my opinion, devlogs are the best way to amass an audience. You get to work on your project and get feedback while developing it. Not to mention, it would also boost your launch. You're building a community before it even releases. And I think that's just really powerful. Looking back at my early devlogs, I really wish I put in more time into them instead of just using cheap text-to-speech. I was so focused on making the game that I almost forgot to tell people it even exists. And right, I know the YouTube game dev space is pretty saturated right now, and I unfortunately don't have a solution to that. If you do, please do leave a comment. It would help a lot of people, and plus, I do read all of them. Anyways, in conclusion, those were the 3 mistakes which, you never know, you might also make. If you want to play Tenkin Sands, you can download it on my itch.io. Who knows, if it gets popular, I might update it. I might add more features, might add those ideas that I spoke of earlier. But until then, I want to work on a smaller, simpler game. Anyways, I hope you learned something. See you next time.